The reduction in the official value of a currency or legal tender in relation to other currencies at any foreign exchange market is known as devaluation. This loss of value for Nigeria's currency, the Naira, has come with a host of attendant consequences, especially with the largest economy on the continent being an import-dependent one. Now, for example, a crate of eggs that cost between 600 and 800 Naira in 2015 not cost around 2,200 Naira in 2022. The same number of eggs, and in some cases even smaller. This shows inflation, which is a consequence of the Naira losing value. Conversations around the Naira are once again coming to the forefront after the International Monetary Fund said that the long-term rate of the depreciation of the Naira equates to a loss of 10.6% of its value annually since 1973. According to the IMF, this rate is 1.5 times higher than the long-term rate of the currencies of other emerging markets and developing economies at 7.2% and of sub-Saharan Africa at 7% over the same period. There have been various attempts to stabilize the Naira and regain its value, but many have fallen short and Nigerians have felt the effects in the real economy. Why is Nigeria struggling with its Naira? Today, we're looking into the possibilities of stopping the Naira's depreciation. This is Business Edge. I'm Tolulope, Adeleru-Balogun. Joining me from here in Lagos, Nigeria is financial analyst and the CEO of Asher Dynamic Solutions, Muktar Mohammed. Muktar, long time. Welcome back to Business Edge. Thank you so much for joining me.
Always a pleasure to hear your voice, Tolulope, and to be on Business Edge and compliment of the season. So when the month has gone this far, you don't say Happy New Year again. You say compliment of the season.
The same to you. So let's get into this conversation. So the IMF is claiming that the Naira has lost 10.6% of its value annually over the past 49 years. So let's start with that claim. Do you think this is actually true? Is this claim a true claim?
You can't argue with data. You can argue with numbers. I mean, you can always argue with English, but when the numbers come, you can argue. You can play around with your English, but you can't play around with numbers. Numbers are always numbers. They are there for everybody to see. And if you doubt it, then do the calculation yourself and you realize it's the same thing they're saying. If 49 years ago we are still doing what we are doing, exactly doesn't mean that we've not really changed. Remember that this 49 years ago that we're talking about, at that time, the depreciation rate, the inflation rate was not this high. The Naira started its nosediving sometime in 1980, between 1980, 81, 82, and took the highest dive in 1984 when we introduced in 1985, I think, so when we introduced the structural adjustment program. And then the Naira nosedived to its lowest, and ever since then, it has been nosediving. And remember, after that, to stay this slide in the Naira, they came in with the Bureau de Change. Another means, created the Bureau de Change to begin to handle some other small consumer supply. Yet that didn't work. And today, we are where we are because we've not really changed the way we do things. We still do things the same way we do things, and we think we will have a different result. I don't think so. I think what we've seen is that all the while we've remained a consuming nation. We have not been producing. So whenever we need 80 to 90% of what we need, we bring it from outside the shore of this country. And so that has not helped our Naira, especially in the supply side. We've not gotten enough of supply. Even when we get enough supply, like what we are experiencing now, other structural decay, or what I call structural challenges, begin to eat into that. Like now we are battling oil price at $100 per barrel. It should call for cause for rejoicing, but unfortunately we are feeling bad because the amount we are paying in subsidy is going to go more than the 3 trillion the NNPC was telling us. So it's just about we have a structural problem. And there's a saying that says if the foundation is faulty, what can the righteous do? So we really need to begin to look at our foundation and to begin to look at what type of economy. Do we really think we are right for capitalism, or we can bring in an own build economy to grow our economy like other developed nations? have done before they joined before they joined like China. We should we be doing that? Or the world has become a global village compared to when China did that. So what should we be doing? What's our advantage? So, I mean, there's a lot of things to think, and unfortunately, what has been Nigerian problem has been leadership. No leadership have been able to think outside the box. All they think about is the easy way out of every problem that we have, leaving it for the next leader to find an easy way around. And then the foundation keep cracking and cracking. We just pray that one day we don't collapse.
So you've listed a number of the issues, because my next question was, how is this loss happening? So you've talked about the nosedive coming after the structural adjustment program, SAP, which also came after an oil boom in the mid-1970s into the early 80s. You've also talked about foundational structural issues as well that the country faces, and some of the adjustments we need to make. In terms of these losses, do you think there's one particular thing that over the past 49 to 50 years has been the biggest challenge in stabilizing the Naira and stabilizing the value, or even increasing the value of the Naira? Has there been one particular thing that's been the biggest challenge?
Averagely, you need to look at average, because before now, if you look at maybe 25 years ago, the importation of refined petroleum products in Nigeria is not this high compared to now. And but then if you want to look at one problem that really caused the Naira depreciation, then you need to look at our importation of refined petroleum products, because up to recently, when they stopped publishing those that were giving the dollar in exchange for goods and services, we realized that those importing oil were actually the major beneficiary when it comes to these currency issues. So I think the greatest drill has been our inability to meet up with our refined capacity for indigenous use. That has been our greatest inability, and that has been one of the points that is driving the Naira this low. And that for me is the major problem. You could talk about other problems, but if you have been able to fix the refineries and the refineries are working, and we can meet our local consumption of refined products, even if those prices will go up based on the international market, there are other things that will help the price to shut down a little, like the cost of transportation. Then we don't have to pay the cost of most of what NAMESA, Nigerian Port Authority, and others will collect. Those also contribute to the hike of the increase in price of this product. So definitely, I think one of our major problems has been our inability to be able to produce refined production, to refine our production locally for consumption.
All right. So when we talk about this, it looks like we're talking at this level of this conversation, but the loss of the value of the Naira, the depreciation over the years, has hit Nigerians very, very hard. So what has that loss translated to when it comes to Nigerians in the market, when it comes to Nigerians at home, when it comes to just the way Nigerians live and the value in terms of the Naira value of living as a Nigerian day to day?
So, but there are three types of people you see in Nigeria: the very rich, the average, and the very poor. There's no, it's the very rich and the very poor. There's no even in middle. So for the very rich, they've still had a field day, because most of these policies tend to favor them. When you are talking about payment of subsidy, they are the ones that have 3 cars. They are the ones that still buy fuel at 165 naira per liter in Lagos and Abuja, and maybe you just have to queue for 1 hour. But the masses that are into transportation, moving from Ikeja to Obalende, are paying high costs in terms of transportation, because the transport prices have gone because of the fuel crisis. So this is what we see. So it has mostly been favored those in the high class. Like you said in your report, also in the beginning of your report, you said that the price of egg alone, you could see those as well. So it's the masses that are really, really suffered. Even if I don't like using that word, the masses. But I think in this case, they are the ones that really suffered the most from government inability to diversify the economy, from government inability to think outside the box, from government inability to meet up with local demand or come up with structures that can help the bottom to get to the middle and to the upper class, and then we'll begin to talk about the rich. What we see in Nigeria is the rich will keep getting richer by the day because the policy tends to come from the up to down approach instead of the bottom to up approach. Remember not to forget that it's as it stands now, Nigeria is almost the world capital for poverty based what we had from the United Nations of recent, where 77 million Nigerians are it's not just poor, extremely poor compared to what they were before.
All right, so let's look at this in terms of businesses as well. So there's one thing to talk about how this has affected Nigerians in every day in the markets, in their homes, but it's also another thing to talk about those who do business. The country is an import-dependent country. How has the Naira's depreciation over the years affected those who import in order to be able to do business or provide goods and services?
Tolulope, it has been hard hit, and you don't need to look too far. Even presently, we are waiting for the inflationary figure to come from the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics. We've seen the cost of gasoline, gas product, which most of our manufacturing industry use, jack up from a low of 250 Naira, some 3 months ago, to 420 Naira per liter. That alone is going to affect the cost of goods and services, because what happens in terms of goods and services is that any cost that you incur in production, you put it back to the consumer. So definitely you see a hike in inflation. That's one way that's done. Then not to forget that almost every Nigerian business are providing power for themselves. Virtually every Nigerian business provide power for themselves. That also have not helped the economy. Then you are thinking about transportation. Then you come to, before we're not talking about insecurity, now we are talking about insecurity. All these have affected the ordinary businessman. And when you talk about importation of goods into Nigeria, you realize that, like I said, 90% of what we consume, we import. Even when government came out with policy of banning of some items not to have access to government source of forex, they still have to bring in India, and there were still other means. Even with the banning of the change, people still have to find means to bring their goods and services. And the unfortunate thing, most of these goods and services that are brought in are goods and services that over 70% of Nigerians need. So they have no option than to buy because we are not able to produce them. And even when we tend to produce them, the quality is very low. And this has to do because of the kind of infrastructure that we have. So it's a major challenge for small businesses, the access to FX, and the access again to attract. You see, the challenge we have as a nation is that we always think of in terms of, going out with the foreign, but in terms of demands for FX has been high, but supply has been very low, and supply can only come up if we begin to produce and then we begin to export. The only major export that we have now that tend to help our reserve is the crude oil. Even if you look at the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics data that came in the last quarter, the non-oil sector has contributed about 94.something% to the GDP. But when you look at that in terms of earnings, how much earning that 94.something% have been able to earn into the economy, you realize even with the negative trend of the oil sector, it seems still the largest earners in terms of bringing revenue to Nigeria. So it's a challenge. So some people say that Nigeria have a revenue problem. And how do we solve those revenue problems? We need to look inwardly and to see how we can attract supply of forex. That's where the only way we can stabilize our currency. When the demands are being made and the demand side are met, the supply side are met, then the normal equilibrium when it comes to economy will come out in play, demand and supply.
Okay. So Muktar, hold the line. We want to talk about the devaluation issue in and of itself. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but maybe it's how Nigeria has been handling it. And then, of course, see if we can get into some solutions on this issue. The central bank is at the center of all of this as the financial regulator here in Nigeria. And a lot of people are wary as to how the CBN has been handling the monetary policy aspect of its responsibilities. The conversation continues after this. And still with me is Muktar Mohammed, the CEO of Astra Dynamic Solutions. And today we're looking at stopping the Naira's depreciation. Now, there are those who believe that right now the value of the Naira is quite artificial So even if Nigeria was to devalue the naira again, there would be nothing to gain. And in conversations like this, we tend to use devaluation and depreciation interchangeably, but they are slightly different. So when we look at the devaluation aspect of things, is another devaluation the way to go? Or is it how Nigeria has been devaluing the naira that's been the issue?
Look, if you look at devaluation of the naira, you realize that when we devalue, there's a little bit of stability. So the challenge in Nigeria is not in the devaluation of the naira, it's the maintenance of when we devalue. How are we able to continuously maintain that status quo? So immediately we devalue, things comes to normal. And then we see the naira goes on that run for the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years without any disruption. But in there, we are not also, once we do that, we forget that we need to continue to strengthen that area. So we tend to see the naira go back to that point again, because we have not been able to attract supply. The major cause of the naira devaluation is supply. Once we are able to get supply in there and demand also, we're able to meet demand and have surplus of supply, then we'll stabilize the currency. And the other ways, again, like I keep saying, is for us to create products. The banking, the CBN and the banking committee have decided that by the end of this year, CBN will no more give FX to the bank to meet up their export demand for their customers. And so that's another way of saying that create your product to attract this FX into our economy. How do you create that product? That is one thing that the CBN have been able to do now, but we have not seen a take-up of it, but it's going to involve a lot of challenges, because for you to have those processes work, it is after if we have stabilized the currency, like what we have done before, and begin to put in structures like what we are trying to do now, where we know that we have enough to stabilize it until then the bank are coming up with product, then we'll begin to have a stable rate for a very long time. But what we see now is that we maintain stability by and by supply that is supply that comes into our system. And then we in turn also are doing the demands, paying off for the demands without attracting more supply. So the challenge is, how do you attract more supply into your economy? In the short term, you create products. In the long term, you grow your sector, the manufacturing sector, the agricultural sector. You make sure you create multiple streams of income that will bring more effects into the Nigerian economy. That is the only way to stabilize the currency. Every other way that you do will be for the short term. But the long-term measure is, how can we as a nation begin to attract forex into our economy? That is one big question. The CBN is coming up with reforms. The CBN is coming up with administrative policy of recent, in the RT 200 policies into stream. In the midst of that, they have come up with about 65 naira for any importer that are able to attract supply of FX into the economy. All these are policies, but how sustainable are these policies in terms of meeting demands? That is where the challenge is. The challenge is, can we meet demand? And how do we meet demand? Can we attract supply?
So I like the fact you bring up the CBN, because some have said that even the policy of using the country's foreign reserves for foreign exchange is a policy that has maybe added to the depreciation of the naira. And you mentioned a number of things that they've tried. So do you think that foreign exchange to foreign reserve policy is one that has contributed to the depreciation of the naira? And has there been anything that the CBN has done that has been even moderately successful in trying to shore up and stop the naira slide?
Yes, Tolulope, let me come with the second question. There's one thing they've done, the import-export window. Remember that when the CBN governor came into power sometime, some years ago, like 6 years ago, or 6 years ago, he came in and we saw the sliding of the naira, and then they came up with the import-export window, and it created up a window whereby foreign investors were able to exchange at market demand rate. It brought stability. That's one of the major policy of CBN that have worked for a very long time. That policy was the one that was sustaining the naira. And at that point, then the COVID-19 disruption comes in. And that is why we are where we are today. Because like I said, there will always be disruption in any economy. But how ready are you to cage this disruption? That has been our major problem. And one of the things that we have done wrongly, that we kept doing, we thinking we have a different result, was in the area of supply, whereby we now begin to create what we call the primary market and the secondary market. That, for me, was one of the greatest mistakes Nigeria have made. Because if you remember that every week 200 million were given to Bureau de Change to help stabilize, rather, it's that same 200 million that have brought us to where we are now. Then you begin to say that policy is the worst policy Nigeria have ever implemented in the area of our FX and foreign reserve maintenance. So I will be getting it right now. Now we are not doing an open-up policy. Before, when we have to do the change, the CBN comes in every week to tell us that they gave them 200 million. But now we don't even know how much is given to the bank in the area to meet demands in school fees, to meet demands in medical, to meet demands in PTE. We need to know so that we know whether these policies are working or not.
All right. So finally, Muktar, as we wrap this up, I need two of the areas very quickly. I think you might say maybe low-hanging fruits, quick returns for the work being done. So there is some success. The CBN seems to finally be facing a direction that you think might get Nigeria to where you're going. But two things that you think the regulator can do in order to address this slide. 10.6% annual loss of a naira for the largest economy on the continent, 200 plus million population, one of the biggest exporters of crude oil. Nigeria should not be where it is right now with its currency. What are two things that the CBN can do to start making a change with that?
One, they need to create products that will attract foreign direct and portfolio investors into the economy for the short term. And the long-term policy is the long-term to stabilize the currency is to make sure that we have a policy that tends to come from the bottom to up approach. How can we help sectors? How can we help a market sector that can attract FX into the market? And that, I think, they are trying to do with the RT 200. If we get it right in the short term and in the long term with the RT 200, that is going to attract about 200 billion into the economy, then I would say these policies will work. But in the short term, we need to come up with policy to attract foreign and direct investors into the Nigerian economy. And then we need to make sure that the RT 200 policy that has been put in place must work for the betterment of everybody, and they must be devoid of corruption. If we can attract $200 billion into our economy for the next 5 years, that will add up to the stability of our currency. That might just be the long-term solution to the sliding of the naira that we've experienced in the past 49 years.
All right. Thank you so much, Muktar Mohammed. I know I'll be seeing you again sometime soon. Do have a pleasant day.
Definitely, Tolulope. You too.
All right. And for 49 years, the naira of the largest economy on the continent has been sliding. Will this be a year where that trend is reversed and there's something different that happens? And will Nigerians experiencing the real economy finally find more value in the currency in their pockets? This year will tell. It's just the end of February 2022. There are 10 more months to see how things play out with the naira. You're watching News Central, and this is Business Edge. Up next is NC 4 to watch. And these are a few stories that we're keeping our eyes on. We start in the southern part of the continent, where the Reserve Bank of South Africa is reporting that private sector credit in the country has increased by 3.12% year on year in January, after rising by 2.58% in December. The broadly defined M3 measure of money supply rose by 5.65% in January, after expanding by 5.71% in the previous month. A parliamentary committee has struck out sections of a bill that sought to usurp the powers of the Central Bank of Kenya as a fiscal agent and banker to the government. MPs had proposed changes to the Debt Management Authority bill, which seeks to establish an independent body to manage the country's debts with a view of reducing the burden, which is projected to hit 8.6 trillion Kenyan shillings in June. The bill proposes to take away the mandates of the CBK as the government's fiscal agent and vest it in the Public Debt Management Authority. Oil soared as energy and commodity markets were thrown into a state of disarray after Western nations unleashed more sanctions to isolate Russia following its invasion of Ukraine. Futures in London jumped more than 7% before giving up some gains to trade near $103 a barrel. Oil supply was already struggling to meet the demand recovery from the reopening of economies, and any disruptions to flows from the world's number 3 producer could sharply exacerbate the tightness. The decision to exclude various Russian lenders from the SWIFT messaging system could result in missed payments and giant overdrafts within the international banking system, and spur monetary authorities to reactivate daily operations in order to supply the market with dollars. And those are a few stories we're keeping our eyes on. Don't forget, at the top of the 12 o'clock hour West African time, News Central Now will bring you all the latest stories from here on the continent and from outside. 11 a.m. West African time throughout this week. Meet me right here on Business Edge for African business, the economy, and finance. I'm Tolulope, Adeleru-Balogun. Have a pleasant day.